The scent of seared scallops and clarified butter was a familiar sort of armor. It clung to the starched black fabric of my apron, a uniform I wore with practiced efficiency. At Maison, lunch service was a battlefield disguised by white tablecloths and hushed string music. My job was to navigate it without a single misstep. My feet, encased in sensible, non-slip shoes, moved with an economy born of 1,000 shifts. Tray balanced on one palm, I weaved between tables, a ghost in the machine of midday fine dining. I was good at this. I could anticipate a request for more water from a subtle glance, knew the exact moment to clear a plate without intruding on a conversation. I existed in the periphery of the wealthy and the powerful, a silent witness to their deals and their dramas. Today, the air was different. It had shifted the moment he walked in. He moved like the room owed him space, and the space conceded. 3 other men, all dressed in dark, impeccably tailored suits, flanked him like shadows, but he was the center of gravity. He was Korean, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. His suit was a shade of charcoal, so dark it was almost black, the kind of material that cost more than my first car. A Patek Philippe gleamed at his wrist, a quiet statement of obscene wealth. He didn't look around the restaurant. He assessed it, catalogued it, and dismissed it in a single, sweeping glance. Our manager, a man who usually oozed a smarmy, unflappable confidence, suddenly looked like a frightened little boy. He personally escorted the man and his entourage to the most secluded table in the house, the one overlooking the private garden. I was assigned to them. Of course, I was the most senior waitress on the floor, the one trusted not to spill wine or forget an order. I approached the table, my notepad in hand. "Good afternoon. May I get you started with something to drink?" My voice was calm, professional. It was my shield. The man's eyes flicked to me, and for a second, I felt pinned. They were dark, almost black, and held a chilling stillness. He didn't see a waitress. He saw something else. His gaze traveled down my body, from my face, over the curve of my chest, the breadth of my hips, the thickness of my thighs beneath my uniform trousers. It wasn't a look of desire. It was an appraisal. Cold. Clinical. Dissecting. He turned to the man on his right and spoke in Korean, his voice a low, smooth baritone that cut through the restaurant's gentle hum. I didn't speak the language, but I knew the tone. It was dismissal. Contempt. His eyes met mine again as he finished, and a ghost of a smirk touched his lips. He knew I didn't understand the words, but he wanted me to understand the meaning. One of his men translated, his English stiff. 4 waters. Still. No ice. I just nodded, my face a carefully constructed mask of polite neutrality. Of course, as I turned away, I felt his gaze on my back. It was like a physical weight. I could feel the insult I hadn't understood settle into my bones. I knew what men like him saw when they looked at a girl like me. An 18-year-old black girl, with curves he would classify as an imperfection. Too much. Too soft. Unrefined. I'd heard it all before, just never from someone who radiated such absolute, lethal authority. I brought their water, my hands steady. I took their order. He wanted the steak rare. He didn't look at the menu. He didn't look at me. He just spoke the words into the air as if expecting the universe to comply. I retreated to the kitchen, the quiet hum of the restaurant feeling thin, fragile. That was when the world shattered. It started with the sound of breaking glass. Not a dropped wine glass, but the explosive report of the large window at the front of the restaurant imploding. Screams erupted. Panic, raw and ugly, tore through the carefully curated ambience. I flattened myself against the wall by the kitchen entrance, my heart hammering against my ribs. 2 men in ski masks were striding into the dining room, holding guns. They weren't here to rob the place. Their eyes were scanning, hunting. They were looking for one table, his table. His bodyguards were already moving, 2 of them forming a human shield, while the 3rd drew a weapon from beneath his jacket. It was a blur of motion, a deadly choreography I couldn't process. The man they were protecting, Mr. Charcoal's suit, didn't flinch. He simply rose to his feet, his hand reaching inside his own jacket. His face was a mask of cold fury. A shot rang out. One of the bodyguards grunted, stumbling back. The attackers were advancing. My training, my instincts screamed at me to hide, to get into the kitchen and lock the door. But my eyes were locked on him. He was exposed, his remaining men occupied. One of the attackers was raising his gun, aiming directly for his chest. I didn't think. I acted. The service corridor. It ran behind the garden wall, a shortcut to the private dining rooms. The door was right behind his table, concealed by a heavy tapestry. No one ever used it during service. No one would expect it. I launched myself from the wall, my body low. I ignored the screams, the shattering of plates. I moved past the tables, my sensible shoes gripping the polished floor. I reached him just as he was drawing his own weapon. I didn't say a word. I grabbed the sleeve of his expensive suit, my grip surprisingly strong, and hauled him backward. He stumbled, shock registering in those cold eyes for the first time. He was bigger than me, solid muscle and bone, but my momentum and the element of surprise were on my side. I yanked him toward the wall, ripped the tapestry aside, and shoved the concealed door open. This way, I hissed, the first words I'd spoken to him that weren't from a script. I pulled him into the narrow, dimly lit corridor just as another volley of shots splintered the wood of the table where he had been standing. The sounds of the gunfight were muffled now, the screams distant. We were plunged into a sudden, shocking silence, broken only by our ragged breaths. He stood pressed against the wall, the gun now in his hand, a sleek, black instrument of death. I stood a few feet away, my back against the opposite wall, the adrenaline making my entire body tremble. He stared at me. The mask was gone. In its place was a look of dangerous, predatory calculation. He wasn't looking at a waitress anymore. He was looking at an anomaly, a problem, a loose end. The insult from before, the dismissal, it all evaporated in the smell of cordite and fear. He had seen my face, and I had just saved his life. He raised his gun, not pointing it at me, but holding it with a stillness that was more terrifying than any threat. "You," he said, his voice a low growl, the English perfect and unaccented. "You are coming with me." It wasn't a choice. It was a verdict. The ride in the black sedan was silent and suffocating. I was sandwiched between two of his guards in the back seat, their bodies tense and solid as rock. The man I'd saved, the man whose name I still didn't know, sat in the front passenger seat. I could see the back of his head, the sharp line of his jaw in the rearview mirror. He didn't look back at me once. He spoke in low, rapid Korean into his phone, his voice ablaid. The city blurred past the tinted windows, familiar streets turning into an alien landscape. My old life, my apartment, my community college textbooks, my half-finished painting on its easel, felt like it was on another planet. A single act of instinct had ripped me out of that world and thrown me into this one, a world of silent men in dark suits and the casual violence that had erupted over seared scallops and sparkling water. We arrived at a skyscraper of black glass and steel that clawed at the sky. A private elevator took us straight to the penthouse. The doors opened into a space so vast and empty it felt more like a modern art gallery than a home. White marble floors, black leather furniture, and an entire wall of glass that offered a godlike view of the city below. It was beautiful and sterile, a luxurious prison. One of the guards gestured for me to sit on a low-slung black sofa. I did, my hands clasped in my lap to stop them from shaking. The boss, Mr. Min, as I'd heard one of his men call him, walked to the window, his back to me. He stood there for a long time, a silhouette against the sprawling metropolis he seemed to own. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. "Chloe," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Chloe," he repeated, tasting the name. He turned around, his dark eyes fixing on me. "You are not afraid." It wasn't a question. It was an observation. I was terrified, I answered honestly. Fear and action aren't mutually exclusive. A flicker of something, surprise, respect, passed through his eyes before the cold mask snapped back into place. The men who attacked me are part of the Park family. They are my rivals. They will not stop. They now know there was a witness, a civilian who helped me. They will be looking for you. The blood drained from my face. What are you going to do to me? That is the question, isn't it? He walked slowly toward me, circling the sofa like a shark. My men believe the cleanest solution is to eliminate the liability. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. Eliminate. Such a neat, tidy word for murder. But he continued, stopping in front of me, forcing me to crane my neck to look up at him. You are an anomaly, Chloe. You saw a gun and ran toward it, not away.
Why?
I thought for a moment, the adrenaline having been replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. You were a customer. My job is to ensure the safety and comfort of the guests in my section. The corner of his mouth twitched, an almost imperceptible movement. You saved the man who insulted you. My eyes widened. You knew I felt it. I know you are not stupid, he said, his voice soft, dangerous. I wanted to see if you would still serve me with the same efficiency. It was a test. Everything was a test in his world. He turned away, walking toward a sleek, minimalist bar. He poured himself a drink, the amber liquid splashing against the crystal. It was then that I saw him wince, a sharp, involuntary movement as he reached with his left arm. His suit jacket was pristine, but something was wrong. Later that night, I was left alone in the living area. I wasn't locked in, but the two guards standing sentry by the elevator were an unspoken promise that there was no escape. I couldn't rest. I paced the cold marble floor, the city lights a dizzying, indifferent tapestry below. I overheard two of his men talking in the hallway, their Korean hushed but urgent. They mentioned the parks, and they mentioned my name. And they mentioned the word for disposal. My chance came around 3 a.m. One of the guards left his post for a moment, heading toward the kitchen. The other had his back to me, focused on the security monitor. The elevator was out, but there was a service staircase. I could try. I could run out into the night, but where would I go? The parks were looking for me. Mr. Min's men saw me as a problem to be solved. My gaze fell on the door to what I assumed was his study. It was slightly ajar. Earlier, I'd seen him go in there. As I hesitated, debating the impossible choice between running and staying, I saw him through the crack. He had taken off his jacket and was struggling with the buttons of his white shirt. His left side was soaked in blood. A dark, ugly stain was spreading across the pristine cotton. He'd been hit in the restaurant, a piece of shrapnel or a stray bullet, and he'd been hiding it all this time. In his world, an injury was a weakness. A weakness was an invitation for sharks to circle. I saw the first aid kit on his desk. I saw the way his hand trembled as he tried to clean the wound himself. And I made my choice. I pushed the door open. He spun around, his right hand instantly going to the gun on his hip, his face a grim mask of pain and fury. "Get out," he snarled. I ignored him. I walked over to the desk, picked up the first aid kit, and set it down next to him on the edge of his desk. "Sit down before you pass out and bleed all over your expensive rug," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the fear churning in my gut. He stared at me, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What are you doing?" "My mother was a nurse," I said, opening the kit and pulling out antiseptic wipes and sterile gauze. It was a lie. My mother was an artist, but I'd patched up enough of my brother's skateboarding injuries to know the basics. "I told you, I take care of the guests in my section. Right now, you're in my section." For a long second, we were locked in a battle of wills. His pride against my pragmatism. Finally, with a low curse, he sank onto the edge of the desk, his body slumping slightly. I took his silence as permission. I carefully cut away the blood-soaked fabric of his shirt. The wound was a nasty gash along his ribs, deep and bleeding sluggishly. As I worked, cleaning the wound with practiced, gentle movements, the room was silent. My fingers brushed against his skin. It was warm, taut with muscle. I could feel the tension coiled in him, the sheer force of will it took for him to allow this, to allow me this close. He smelled of cedar and something else, something metallic and sharp.
Blood.
I had to put butterfly stitches on to close the gash. It required me to lean in close, my face just inches from his bare chest. I could feel the heat radiating from him, feel his breath stir the fine hairs at my temple. I focused on the task, on the neat, precise work of my hands. But I was aware of his eyes on me, watching my every move. When I was done, I taped a thick gauze pad over the stitches. My hands lingered for a second too long on his side. I looked up, and our eyes met. The vast, empty space of the penthouse seemed to shrink, collapsing into the few inches between us. The city lights outside blurred. In his eyes, I saw something other than coldness. It was a raw, unguarded intensity. He saw me. Not my size, not my job, not the color of my skin. He saw the person who was touching him with steady hands in his moment of weakness, the one who had chosen to stay when she should have run. He said my name, and it sounded different than anyone else had ever said it. It wasn't just a name. It was a question, a statement, a warning. Chloe. The fragile truce our proximity had created was shattered by the ringing of his phone. The cold mask slammed back down. He took the call, his voice once again a blade of ice as he issued orders in Korean. But when he hung up, he looked at me, and the calculation in his eyes was different now. I was no longer just a liability. I was something far more complicated. The next 48 hours were a blur of tension. The parks were getting bolder. They'd gotten the security footage from the restaurant's back alley. My face was now known. They found my apartment, tossing it looking for me. Mr. Min Junho, I'd learned his first name was, had his men move my mother to a secure location upstate without even asking me. It was a violation and a protection, all at once. He was tying my life to his, knot by knot. The danger was no longer just his problem that I was caught in. It was mine. The threat had my name on it. We were moving. A convoy of 3 black sedans, sweeping through the city's arteries toward a new safe house. I was in the back of the lead car, with Junho beside me. The silence between us was thick, charged with the memory of my hands on his skin. He hadn't brought it up. Neither had I. But it was there. The ambush was brutally efficient. A garbage truck pulled out, blocking the street. The car behind us was T-boned by an SUV. Gunfire erupted from the rooftops. Our driver swore, trying to reverse, but we were boxed in. Junho moved faster than I thought possible. In one fluid motion, he unbuckled me, shoved my head down, and covered my body with his own. His weight was immense, a crushing shield of muscle and expensive wool. The car windows spiderwebbed, bullets thudding into the armored plating. I could feel the vibrations through his body, hear his harsh breathing in my ear. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low rumble against my cheek. His scent filled my senses, cedar, smoke, and the faint, clean smell of antiseptic from the wound I had dressed. In the midst of chaos and terror, a strange sense of calm washed over me. It was the absolute certainty of his protection. He would die before he let one of these bullets touch me. And for a terrifying moment, as the world exploded around us, I realized I felt the same. The thought of him being hurt sent a spike of pure, primal fear through me. His men were returning fire, the noise deafening inside the car. One of the attackers managed to wrench my door open. A hand grabbed my arm, trying to haul me out. I screamed, kicking and struggling. Junho roared, a sound of pure rage, and fired his weapon twice over my head. The hand on my arm went limp. Our driver found an opening, ramming the garbage truck and plowing through. We sped away, leaving the carnage behind. When we finally reached the new safe house, a nondescript industrial building, the adrenaline left me, and I started to shake uncontrollably. Junho led me inside, his hand a firm, warm presence on the small of my back. Later, I found him staring at a tablet, his face grim. It was a file on the attackers. Security stills from the street cameras. I looked over his shoulder, and I saw it. One of the men, the one who'd grabbed my arm, now dead in the street, had a tattoo on his wrist. A small, stylized scorpion. I'd seen it before. In the restaurant. He wasn't one of the shooters. He was a busboy. A new hire, only been there a week. He'd been clumsy, nervous. I'd thought it was just because of the pressure of the job. "The Scorpion," I said, my voice hoarse. "The busboy at the restaurant. He had that tattoo on his wrist." Jun-ho's head snapped up, his eyes boring into me. "Are you certain?"
"Positive," I said.
He bumped into me near the kitchen. I saw it clearly. That was it. The inside man. The piece of information they needed. I gave it to him, knowing what it meant. I was no longer just a witness. I was an informant, an accessory. I was handing this man a death sentence. And I didn't hesitate. I saw the look in Jun-ho's eyes as he picked up his phone. It was the look of a predator who had just been given the scent of his prey. I had crossed a line, and there was no going back. That night, the threat from the Parks was systematically and brutally dismantled. I didn't ask for details. I didn't need them. The quiet finality in Jun-ho's demeanor told me everything. He found me on the small balcony of the safe house, looking out over the sleeping city. The air was cool against my skin. He stood beside me, not speaking for a long time. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with everything that had happened. "That weakness I despise," he said finally, his voice low, almost rough. "The kind that invites predators. It is not in you." It wasn't a compliment. It was an admission, a confession that his first assessment of me, that cruel, dismissive glance in the restaurant, was the single greatest miscalculation of his life. I turned to face him, the faint city glow illuminating the sharp planes of his face. "You looked at me, and you saw someone soft, someone who would break easily," I said, my voice even. "You saw my body and decided my character. You were wrong." "Yes," he said, the single word holding a universe of meaning. He took a step closer, closing the space between us. The real move came 2 days later. The true enemy wasn't the Parks. They were just opportunistic hyenas. The real snake was inside Jun-ho's own house. His most trusted lieutenant, a man named Kong, was the one who had tipped off the Parks. He was the one who'd leaked my identity, hoping the ensuing chaos would weaken Jun-ho's position enough for him to stage a takeover. Kong made his final play, not by attacking Jun-ho directly, but by targeting me. He used my mother. A simple photo sent to my phone. My mom sitting in a cafe, smiling, completely unaware of the man with a scorpion tattoo sitting 2 tables away. The message was simple: come alone or she dies. The final confrontation took place in the place where it all began, the now-closed Maison restaurant. Kong was waiting for me, smug and confident. He didn't know that I wasn't alone. I had shown the photo to Jun-ho. The look on his face had been terrifying. It was not the cold fury of a boss betrayed, but the primal rage of a man whose most precious thing was threatened. I walked into the darkened restaurant, the ghosts of our first meeting hanging in the air. Kong stood by the table where we had sat, a gun in his hand. "The girl who started it all," he sneered. "He's gone soft over you. A fat, little waitress. You've made him weak." His words, which would have wounded me a week ago, meant nothing now. They were the desperate insults of a man who had already lost. "You think this is about weakness?" I said, my voice ringing with a confidence I didn't know I possessed. "He was never weak. But you were always a coward, hiding in the shadows, letting others do your dirty work." Jun-ho had told me what to do. Create a distraction. Give him an opening. I saw the bar, the rows of expensive liquor. I saw the candelabra on a nearby table, still holding half-melted candles. An idea, reckless and insane, sparked in my mind. "You talk about strength," I said, taking a slow step toward the bar, drawing Kang's attention. "But all you have is a gun someone else gave you." I reached the bar, my hand closing around the neck of a bottle of high-proof whiskey. In one fluid motion, I spun and hurled it at the heavy velvet curtains behind Kong. Then I grabbed the candelabra and threw it. The effect was instantaneous. The alcohol-soaked curtains went up in a whoosh of flame. Kong yelled in surprise, spinning around as the fire greedily climbed the wall, casting dancing, monstrous shadows across the room. That was the only opening Jun-ho needed. He emerged from the darkness of the service corridor, a silent specter of vengeance. The fight was short, brutal, and ended with a final, definitive sound that echoed in the burning room. When it was over, Junho came to me, his face smudged with soot. He ignored the fire, ignored the body on the floor. He looked only at me. He reached out, his hand cupping my cheek, his thumbs stroking my skin. His touch was not gentle. It was a brand acclaim. "They targeted you because they thought you were my weakness," he said, his voice raw with an emotion I couldn't name. The firelight danced in his dark eyes. "They were wrong. You are my strength." The cost of that strength was my entire world. I could never go back to being Chloe, the waitress. That girl was gone, burned away in the wreckage of my old life. The police would call the restaurant fire an accident, the dead man a victim of a gang-related dispute. Every trace of what happened would be erased by Junho's power, except for the change inside me. We stood in the penthouse days later, the city a carpet of jewels at our feet. The air between us was different. The tension had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something else, something solid and unbreakable. He had never apologized for his initial insult, but his every action since had been a refutation of it. He had shown me in the only language he knew, the language of violence and protection, that he saw me. All of me.
He didn't ask me to stay.
He didn't need to. The question was a settled thing. He stood by the vast window, looking out at the empire he commanded, and held out his hand to me, palm up. It wasn't a request. It was an acknowledgement of a truth that had been forged in gunfire and fire. This was my world now. I looked at his hand, at the long, elegant fingers that had wielded a gun to protect me. I looked at his face, at the cold, beautiful mask that I now knew how to see past. I thought of the girl I used to be, and I let her go. Then, I walked across the cold marble floor and placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, a firm, possessive grip. It was not the soft, comforting hold of a lover. It was the unyielding clasp of a king, claiming his queen. The city lights blazed below, and in the reflection in the glass, I saw us. Not a mafia boss and a waitress, but two survivors who had found their unlikely strength in each other. And I knew, with absolute certainty, I was finally home.